Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this CAMCA forum, which is jointly sponsored by the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute in Washington and Stockholm, and by the Rumsfeld Foundation, and of course, the wonderful circle of Rumsfeld Fellows whom we've been in contact with over the past decade. Kyrgyzstan at this moment presents a challenge to analysts and interpreters. Where is it going? On the one hand, fully 79% of the 37% of Kyrgyz who voted wanted to do away with the existing parliamentary system that had been created back in 2009. And let it be said that the new president, Sadir Japarov, enjoys overwhelming support among the public at large. He's abolished the prime ministership. He's claimed the right to appoint judges. And he has, in general, made a very activist start, so much so as to raise a lot of questions. He's proposed an enigmatic body called a Kurultai. What will it be? What does it mean? But as I say, the public largely agrees. He's been identified as one of the most trusted politicians in the country in recent years. Now, then on the other hand, he has taken steps which the world has rightly applauded. He has, for example, worked out with President Mirsuljan in Uzbekistan a solution to the Sokh enclave problem, something that's vexed both countries for 20 years. And he is appointing a lot of activists and competent people, so we'll see where it all heads. With us this morning, this evening, this afternoon, to analyze the situation and provide their personal insights we have four very, very qualified speakers. We're going to lead off with Azim Azimov, who's in the public relations and political communications consultant. He's the founder and CEO of Media Kitchen, which is an award-winning creative company. He has also been actively involved in the political process, having managed campaigns for former Kyrgyz president, several prime ministers, and mayors of Kyrgyzstan's largest cities. Mr. Azimov is also a political commentator. He hosts a major web series on Kyrgyz politics. He has a BA in mass communications and journalism from American University of Central Asia. Azim, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Starr, for this presentation. And I want to say my warm greetings from Kyrgyzstan to all the panelists and to all our attendees who are listening to us from all over the world. And so the question that is put in the heart of today's discussion goes as constitution, whether it's a step forward or backwards. And so because there is a debate component to our discussion, I can't think of, like even few arguments to support why this new constitution would be a step forward. And this hurts me to say as a Kyrgyz citizen, and it saddens me. And so I want to say it, sincerely, without sugarcoating, and speak about what this new constitution, well, not only what the content of new constitution says, but what the circumstances under which the constitution has been adopted say about current state of affairs in Kyrgyzstan. And therefore, I don't want to go deep into details about the certain chapters and the wording of the constitution, but rather try to analyze again these circumstances, like how this constitution was adopted. And what have we achieved as a society, by having this new constitution placed and instituted in Kyrgyzstan? So, first of all, I want to start off by saying that, in my opinion, this new constitution is not about, instilling strong presidency and abolishing the parliamentary democracy in Kyrgyzstan. It's not about presidency or the parliamentary rule. I think it's more about, lack of accountability. Because, for Sadir Japarov and his team to have, to grasp all the power and, to have ultimate authority in Kyrgyzstan, they actually didn't need to change the constitution, because the previous draft of the constitution, well, pretty much guaranteed the complete kind of ownership of power in Kyrgyzstan. And so what has happened right now is not about granting more authorities to the president. I think it's more about removing accountability from the president, because right now pretty much president can do like whatever he wants, and there are very few mechanisms of checks and balances that can be put in action for us to hold the president accountable. And I think that's one of the most concerning part of this whole new constitutional process. The second thing is, what I want to say is that, again, as a Kyrgyz observer, I don't think that this constitution is a product of a political vision. Again, I don't believe that it's about strengthening the institution of presidency and again, abolishing the parliamentary rule like per se. I think, well, this constitution now, what reminds me more of a Frankenstein, kind of a monster. We see a lot of political actors like all chiming in, putting in their random, ideas, and therefore, like we have had a lot of anecdotes concerning this constitution, where some people are furious about, including the passages about, so-called Kyrgyz traditional values and those kind of things. Again, I don't think that we should be looking at this constitution as a meticulous text where we should be looking for new laws and how they're going to be adopted, because I don't believe this constitution is a product of a political vision. It's more like kind of it has sort of improvisational tone to it, and then these events have been going in that way ever since the October events took place last year after the elections. The third thing that really concerns me again is not more of the content of the constitution, but rather the process that has been put in place. Like we have seen over the last month that this constitution hearings have been conducted behind closed doors. We didn't know like what the eventual text of the constitution was going to be like for a long time, and therefore this new constitution lacks transparency, and because it's a main law, I think, well, it kind of set the tone for the whole political process that is going on right now. The fourth thing that I want to say is that, again, I don't think this constitution is going to help to strengthen the institute of presidency. And it's not about, removing the institution of parliament, because, unlike all other, public and state institutes in Kyrgyzstan, the institution of presidency does not need to be strengthened. It's already strong, and people have a lot of, respect and kind of institutional memory towards, the presidency, regardless of who the president is. Like, if the president changes tomorrow, most of the, supporters among the elites of the current president will just switch their position like overnight, because like everybody believes in the president, and that has been the case even when on paper we had the parliamentary democracy. But also, again, like I said, besides making the institution of president strong, it's also making it like less and less accountable. And among the final thing that I want to say is that in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, there was a poll conducted in Kyrgyzstan which asked Kyrgyz citizens whether they have ever read the constitution or not. And so in 2017, the number of people who actually read the constitution was around 20%. And I have no numbers to support my statements right now, but I believe that currently it's even less. First of all, because like I said, the whole constitutional this reform process has been held behind closed doors, and we were never given the full scale kind of opportunity to actually see what the new constitution is about, but also because, you know, the constant changes and amendments that are being introduced to the constitution, and we're talking not about, you know, amendments to certain chapters and passages, but we're talking about, you know, complete kind of change of the constitution and change of the course that the country is headed on. And so all of this de-evaluate the constitution. And so, you know, like I said, it's a main law, and you know, like ideally you would expect people to respect it, you know, to cite it as a ultimate kind of, you know, guidance in making our state decisions. However, I think, like, you know, these constant changes that are being introduced, they make people appreciate the constitution less and less, like with every amendment. And that, of course, leads to overall, you know, sense of lawlessness, because, you know, this is constitution that we, again, like in an ideal world, we should be living by, you know, like for decades and like probably maybe centuries. And, you know, when you see all the, you know, procedures being kind of violated, you know, when you're seeing this negligent approach to, you know, to drafting this constitution and conducting public hearings, of course, you know, people, you know, wouldn't find it as legitimate as one would wish to. And so, again, like I would want to sugarcoat it and, you know, maybe to come up with some of the positive, maybe, you know, aspects to this constitutional reform. However, again, it saddens me as a Kyrgyz citizen, but I think this is a completely, this is a step backward. And just to summarize why I think so is because this constitution lacks accountability, constitutional reform lacks accountability, it lacks political vision, it lacks sense of ownership, because for a long time we didn't know who the author of this constitution was, because, you know, people were playing this hot potato thing with saying, no, it's not like my initiative, it's not me who came up with this and all that. I think it diminishes public and state institutions, and I think overall it leads to de-evaluation of the of constitution, and therefore I strongly believe this is a step backward for Kyrgyzstan, unfortunately.
Azimov, it's no surprise that you are a very highly regarded political commentator in Kyrgyzstan, whether people agree with you or not. Thank you for a very trenchant critique, and we're now turning to Mr. Talant Sultanov. He's founder and chair of the Kyrgyz chapter of the Internet Society and an expert at the Center for Strategic Initiatives. He previously served as an advisor to the Prime Minister, in which role he helped shape the digital transformation program. I remember the start of that. He was also director of the National Institute for Strategic Studies, worked in both Washington and Almaty for the World Bank, and founded the Silk Road Studies Center. He earned his BA at San Francisco State and an MA from Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs. He's also a very, very vigorous athlete.
Thanks so much, Dr. Starr, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be in this panel with such distinguished speakers. I would like to take a little different stance maybe from Azim's introduction and try to find some positives maybe in what's happening in Kyrgyzstan. And in responding to the question, is it a step forward or step backward, I would like to say that it's a circling around. And we've been circling around for the past 30 years. And I would like to hope that maybe this time we will find actually the point which will finally bring stability to Kyrgyzstan's political developments. And another analogy, I guess, that we could use is this pendulum swinging. And in my introduction, I'd like to touch upon maybe 4 main points. What has happened? What's going on now? What is going to be happening soon? And if I have sufficient time, maybe potential solutions to the challenges that we're facing. So what has just happened is the pendulum swing as a overreaction to the very, I guess, very situation that where people became very disillusioned in the parliamentary system. I think the problem was that not the parliamentary system itself, but how it played out in our country, that there was actually no person or no institution responsible for the country's development. And whenever challenges occurred, it would be just finger pointing. The president would say it's a parliament's job, parliament would beat the government over the head, although according to the previous constitution, the prime minister was supposed to be the strongest figure, but in effect, he became the weakest figure in this whole picture. So de facto, I guess the situation has now become that, like with the new constitution, the de facto situation has brought into the de jure, where the president should be the strongest figure and actually the person who is going to be responsible for all the happenings in the country. And I think he is actually taking many of the responsibilities for some of the, I guess, mistakes that are already being made. And he realized that eventually people will be asking him for this, what's happening. The actual election process was very interesting. I think these were among the cleanest maybe elections in the recent history of the country. There was no blatant vote buying as it was evidenced in the October elections, for instance. There wasn't much administrative resource, but here I would like to put an asterisk that it's usually the people who receive salaries from the budget will vote for the ruling party just because they don't know how to choose a political party. The political parties have no platforms. And we have this, I guess, party shuttling syndrome where, for example, former communists suddenly become liberals, or, you know, if you take any party, you wouldn't know what they stand for. And that's why for rural people, it's very hard to choose a political party. For even young, educated people, it's very hard to make a distinction which parties are standing for what. And I agree with the argument of Azim. When people went to vote for the constitution, I don't think anyone has actually read it. I don't know if anybody outside this closed circle of people who wrote the new constitution actually have read the document in detail. Another phenomenon I wanted to highlight here, our constitutional elections took place together with the municipal elections, local elections, and I would call these elections as party time, because if you looked at the advertisement and billboards, the candidates were dressed in, you know, all kinds of costumes, colorful, you know, very interesting, so much creativity. And this led me to believe that we need something like Mardi Gras in your favorite city of, you know, New Orleans, Dr. Starr. I think we need some channels to express our creativity, and elections have become such a thing. Another thing, I think, another benefit of, I guess, elections is people who have no jobs suddenly have a lot of work to do during elections. And I guess the more elections we have, the more work people have, jobs people actually have. So what is, with all that, what's happening now? I think the government or the leadership is taking on very difficult reforms. And of course, reforms by default cannot be popular. There are certain issues that have not been resolved for over 3 decades. And you mentioned one of them is the border issues, Dr. Starr, and anybody who decides to take on this issue is going to be viewed as a traitor. This has happened in the past, and I'm sure whoever is trying to resolve this issue understands that nobody will say thank you. But the leadership realizes that without resolving this issue of borders, it will be very hard to achieve, you know, long-term sustainable cooperation in the region. Another reform that's being undertaken is the optimization of the public service, public sector. It's a very large body, and there has been calls even from the international community, international partners, that you need to optimize it. And this leadership has also taken on that as well. Of course, it's not an easy process, and we have not seen the actual results, but I think it's a process. Third major issue that's being dealt with is the energy crisis. Electricity tariffs have not been raised for the past decade, and the situation in the sector is disastrous. But whoever decides to do reform and raise tariffs, and we've seen it all over the world, is going to have a very difficult time. But these guys are actually doing this work. And I think there's fourth reform that I would like to highlight is what I'm calling is a de facto amnesty. You know, governments usually launch this amnesty where you declare your capital, which you've been hiding, but this time they are bringing people to rich people, saying that, you know, you pay something back to the budget and then we will clear you of all the potential liabilities. So this is something also going on in Kyrgyzstan. Of course, the situation is very challenging. It's very difficult, but I think we need to give benefit of the doubt so that for these reforms to actually bring results, there has to be time. But this brings me to the third point, what is awaiting us? And unfortunately, I don't think we have a lot of time. In Kyrgyzstan, we don't have room for mistakes. You know, I think the success of the Silicon Valley was that startups are allowed to fail. You know, out of hundreds of failures, then you have one super successful, company. In Kyrgyzstan, if you make one little mistake, you are going to be very much in great risk in the future. That's one. Second, we have this perfect storm of social and economic and actually political challenges. We've talked about political problems. We have the COVID situation rampaging, and third, the environmental situation is also going to be very difficult. So I think what the leadership is going to do, of course, in the early days, they will try to find somebody to blame. And unfortunately, this NGOs have become kind of the scarecrow. So at the moment, all the wherever difficult issues are being discussed, you can just say like, oh, look, here are the NGOs advocating for Western values, human rights, LGBT rights, and then suddenly all the attention is gone there, and the big issues are not being taken care of. I think I've spoken too much already this time, but looking forward to also contributing in the later discussion. Thank you, Dr. Star.
I just want to note that even though Talant, Sultanov, and Azimov have expressed very different views on the situation, in Kyrgyzstan, they remain good friends, as does our next speaker, Mirsuljan Namazaliev, who for 3 years directed the CAFMI Information Agency, which is one of the leading online news sources in Kyrgyzstan, and then for 9 years wrote for New Eurasia, which is a Zurich-based citizen media company. He founded in 2009 CAFMI Research Center and still heads that body today. He has led various civic movements promoting democratic change, the rule of law, and economic freedom with minimal interference from the government. Mr. Namazaliev earned his BA at the Bishkek Humanities University. Mirsuljan.
Hello, everyone.
It looks like you're speaking to us from a vehicle.
Yes, I was on my way. I wasn't able to get on time, so
wonderful.
So I decided to stop. Yeah, I decided to stop here.
It's good to see you.
So I hope you hear me well. And I wanted to start. Actually, my idea of my start was different, but I liked one phrase from Talant, which was Kyrgyzstan does not have a right for mistakes, right? For failure. Oh, I think we are going to do a lot of failures, a lot of mistakes these upcoming years, because this is also somewhat interesting and I don't know, controversial, because something is happening in Kyrgyzstan. We are moving. If the past 3 years under Sooronbay Jeenbekov, it was just a stagnation without any move, any decisive actions. Now we're moving, but it's as if we put in a small room a big bear who will move with blind eyes, and somewhere he will do the right thing, and somewhere he will, or in many places he will do a lot of failures. Or before, there was just a small rabbit in that small room, not moving, not doing anything, and that room was called already. So in my opinion, what we are facing today is that we have this big bear in our little room called Kyrgyzstan, and it's moving. So one of the first moves that we've got now is this constitutional referendum. I do not believe in any referendums that can be held in Kyrgyzstan or in Central Asia or in post-Soviet countries, except Estonia and a few other countries in that part of the continent, because we are unstable democracies. Although like 30 years we say Kyrgyzstan is a democratic country, it's not. And even now, it's not yet. While we don't have that democracy, we are not able to conduct it fair. And always the government or whoever is conducting the referendum will be winning it. That's why I think everybody knew. The only hope was that whether the voters' turnout will be low, and then this idea of conducting the referendum or approving this draft of the constitution will fail. But still, I think Azim and Talant and I and many others, although we had some, I don't know, maybe some expectation, a very small percentage probability, but we knew it will not help, and the constitution will be approved. The next thing is what I want to say is that this constitution is not the final constitution of Kyrgyzstan. Maybe the next constitution will be totally new, not even rewritten or not even edited out of this version, because this version is really a step backward. There is full power. Even the chairman, chairwoman or chairman of the Supreme Court, of the Constitutional Court, are going to be elected by the directive of the president. We already know the position of the parliament, which always just listens to any president who comes. As Azim said, the next day they will turn their backs on the previous president, because the office of the president is very strong. It became even stronger. And as Talant mentioned, for a long time there was this demand for responsibility, for asking one person or one entity who is responsible for the situation in Kyrgyzstan. And the idea was that, okay, we have prime minister, we have the president, so one of them should lead the executive branch of power, not all the branches of power. So the current leadership has confused it. They thought that they should be responsible for everything, including the judiciary, including the parliament. That's why the power of the president actually grew. But when you are weak, when you are unable to control, when you are unable to manage, but you have too much power, you will just burst. You will not be able to do what you are expected to do by the people, because now all the people, especially those supporting and demanding Mr. Japarov to be in power, they know that Sadr Japarov is in charge. So he has all the rights by the constitution, and everything is written. So tomorrow they will ask from him. But still, the new constitution didn't provide that opportunity. Still, there's still the chairman of the government. And for example, just a recent story with I don't know what is that called, with the roots of a flower or of something growing in Kyrgyzstan to be as a medicine against COVID-19. For example, this topic was first outspoken and presented by president, and then the Minister of Healthcare spoke about it and made this presentation. But the whole parliament and the society are talking only about the Minister of Healthcare. So the same will happen for any failure when the president has strong powers and controls everything. then the minister or the head of the cabinet of ministers will be responsible, but the president will be in charge. So this is what I don't like with this constitution. In the beginning, last November, December, when they said that they will conduct a referendum, of course, I knew that if they are so powerful now with a very big support by the population, then the referendum will go. And I thought that if we helped the current newcoming leadership, right, with the draft constitution or with the ideas for the constitution, then maybe we would be helpful. I think I wasn't right, and that's why I didn't find any, I don't know, progressive ideas, any progressive measures in the new constitution, and the everything new that is included there for me is a big giant step backwards for Kyrgyzstan. And when we speak about the steps backwards, I think this is really and literally it's backwards, because after 5 years or after 10 years, we'll come again to the question of changing the constitution. We'll come to this issue again, and we'll probably conduct another referendum, or maybe at that moment we'll be ready to adopt one that will be for a longer period of time, not repeating the mistakes that we had previously, not losing the original of constitution, not making a lot of mistakes, obvious mistakes, and the I think professional lawyers, if they can read Russian or Kyrgyz, and if they read the constitution, they will really cry. And that thing is news, I think, is what we have today. But like I said in the beginning, we are in a small room, but we are moving, and we are moving fast. Many things are happening. I think many changes are expecting us in the near future, and if some of them are going to be big, if some of them are going to be right, maybe that will help us keep our country, help us grow, help us move forward. But for now, the constitution and many things that came with it are regretfully steps backward. And Talant, when Talant spoke, he also mentioned a lot of reforms, a lot of changes that are happening. Some of them probably really positive, although not popular, like electricity rates or some other issues. Some of them are probably being done against the law, or at least not in compliance with the laws that we have. But they are moving. I really hope that our new leadership in the country will learn from their own mistakes, will learn from the mistakes of our previous 5 presidents, and they will not continuously repeat all those mistakes. But I think we will have a lot of failures in the near future, and that's a negative perspective of what I think many of my friends are expecting here. But we are in Bishkek, we are in Kyrgyzstan, we believe in the bright future, and as we are moving fast, there will be many good news from us too.
Thank you very much. I'm fascinated to see how you've rescued an element, however thin, an element of optimism in an otherwise rather dark picture. I don't know if this is a product of your desire to provide balance, or whether this is your deep belief that somehow things might turn out for the good. We're now going to hear from an outsider who's not really an outsider at all. He's an insider, although a citizen of Sweden. Johan Engvall is a senior research fellow at the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute and Silk Road Studies program at our base in Stockholm, and a researcher at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. He's the author of numerous books and articles on Central Asian affairs, and he published a widely hailed book on the issue of corruption in Kyrgyzstan, and this book has been had a very interesting life both within the country of Kyrgyzstan and more broadly. He began his studies of Kyrgyzstan with his PhD, and is one of the few Western scholars on Kyrgyzstan who actually has taken the time to learn the language. So, Johan Engvall, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Starr. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to participate, especially together with three such prominent experts from Kyrgyzstan. It's always especially fun to engage in discussions with people who actually know what they're talking about here. And I cannot pretend to have that kind of in-depth knowledge right now from Sweden, but turn to this. I think the first question to ask in a way is why did this situation emerge? I would say I have been reading quite a lot of articles now and reports coming out all the time on Kyrgyzstan the past month, but most of them, they have a common theme. Yeah, they sort of describe how one person, the current president, and his closest associates, they have kind of hijacked the Kyrgyz state. They have pushed through this autocratic constitution and destroying the country's democracy in the process here. Maybe that is the case, but I really doubt that it is so simple. Yeah, so I mean, this situation did not just come out of nowhere. I think we have to really try to go back and look how this 2010 constitution, this so-called parliamentary constitution, how it worked in practice, in order to understand also why things did not maybe turn out as hoped for. And also this helps to explain, I think, why many people in Kyrgyzstan felt that the return to a presidential system might be a preferable alternative here. So if you turn back then to 2010, I will here come into a little bit also maybe complementary aspects of what already Talant especially said there. But when in 2010, Kyrgyzstan was fresh out of its second revolution in 5 years, they have had both Akayev and Bakiyev, two presidents who came to rule the country quite a lot for the benefits of their families and not the people maybe. So they had both also changed the constitutions repeatedly, and they had strengthened the presidential powers here. So then when Bakiyev was out in 2010, the idea was, of course, that this type of monopolization of power and wealth, it shouldn't take place a third time. Yeah. So to do so, this new constitution was adopted, and which weakened, of course, the powers of the president. And in a way, this also, of course, made sense in the light of Kyrgyzstan's experiences before that. But I would say that there were a few things problematic in practice with this system. The first thing that I would emphasize is related to the constitutional design itself here. That this constitution, it raised the status of the prime minister, but it did not diminish fully the powers of the president. Yeah, so the president retained many powers to influence the state's domestic and foreign policy, and this helped first Atambayev, then Jeenbekov to really re-establish this presidential office as the main institution, the focal point in this system. So eventually also all the other political institutions became quite subordinated here to the president's office. But in practice then it became more of a presidential system than this parliamentary that was on paper. Yeah. So, and another problem here was also that these rules, I would say, did not really encourage any of the major political actors here to carry out any kind of long overdue. We've talked about was mentioned earlier, these reforms that are needed. This, I would say, this single mandate also for the president, that gave him very few incentives to try to conduct some reforms and in a way to do reforms in a way to seek re-election. Yeah, and also on the other side, then, since there was no election here scheduled, there was no way in a way to hold the president accountable in that sense. And then, of course, this very unstable nature of the coalition governments that took place over this decade really undermined the position here of the prime minister. And I think during the past decade, I think if you look at it on average, maybe a prime minister remained in office for less than a year, I think. And then, of course, you had these members of parliament, of course, who very often moved from one party to another. Yeah. So I would say that all this short-sightedness here made this here very short-term game in a way from all the political actors here. They primarily tried to control the country's resources here during this short time that were available to them. So, and this, of course, did not provide a very good environment for any long-term policy development. Another thing that I maybe would mention briefly also here is this weak and fragmented party system that was still so placed at the heart now of this new political system after 2010. But these parties, they were immature in this sense, and they unable to really serve as some kind of channel between the citizens and the policy making. And also they had this practice of ahead of these parliamentary elections, the major parties, they tended to auction off their slots in their party list. They attracted a certain kind of people who made investments into trying to get a place in the parliament, and then of course they wanted to get their money back when they were there. Yeah. So I would say that as a result here, the national parliament became very much corruption became built in here as the foundation of this system, and this also, I would say, led to a disengagement of state and society that I think is really an important aspect here. So I would say that all of this, the fragmentation of political power and also this weakening of the formal institutions and governance here led to a loss of faith really here in this post 2010 political leadership and this type of parliamentary system that they came to represent. So this led to political void here to be filled. And there we are now, of course, and in the same situation in a way as in 2010. All focus on the constitution as some kind of miracle cure for Kyrgyzstan, but this time it's the opposite. The new powers, they have convinced a sufficient amount of people that the problems can be cured by a strong presidential system. And I also agree with a few things that have been said there about this circumstances under which this constitution was drafted and approved, and that there are also severe problems with the content here, especially these weak checks and balances, which opens up for an authoritarian development. And we already see some attempts maybe here, some arrests and focus on political enemies, this type of rhetorics. And we should also remember that even if 85% supported this new constitution, the voter turnout was historically low here, less than 40% here. So the active support might not be that strong. But with that said, if we want to try to understand why people were prepared to accept this strongly presidential constitution, I would perhaps relate to Azim's point here, but offer an opposite interpretation of this problem with accountability. And I would say that this parliamentary style system was really characterized by, as Talant also said, it was a parliament with 120 deputies with their own interests. You had these changing governments and prime ministers that were changing all the times, and at least one president here who did not make any decisions really. So compared to this situation, you can say on the other hand that Japarov, he's not hiding in that sense. He has gathered virtually all powers in his hands. I mean, the prime minister will be a little more, according to this constitution, than the head of the presidential administration. But this will make it difficult also for him to blame anyone else for any failures here. And I think that this may be appealing also to large parts of society. They know who is in charge. If the president doesn't deliver, maybe get rid of him again as well, yeah, and try again with a new leader and maybe with a new constitution again, yeah. But it's a clearer in that sense. But to summarize, to round up here, I would still argue that all this attention paid to constitutional matters in Kyrgyzstan, I think it shouldn't be overblown. It tends to detract from what are the real problems here, I would say. But during all these years that I've been following Kyrgyzstan, what strikes me is how much time actually that politicians and other experts, they spend a lot of time on, and they are very articulate also about this with constitutional designs, and they think philosophically about the merits of one system over the other and so on. So a lot of discussions on these issues, but what you hear much less, often completely forgotten, is this more level down, yeah, you know, how to design political programs, concrete policies, these more boring issues maybe, but that are key for real political reforms. This more practical approach to politics rather than only about abstract constitutional discussions. So I think there's a real need to focus on the content here of politics rather than just the form. And of course also at some point, I think the quality of governance aspect, of course, comes in. As long as very large parts of society, they feel that they are left behind, they see limited opportunities, and also they feel that the state does not deliver any services really, they will always be easy prey for populist politicians and the more simple policy solutions here. So it's really about getting the basic things with the state in order, I would say. And the last thing, I would also say that, of course, if you broaden the picture a little bit, this situation is not unique for Kyrgyzstan. If you look at, for instance, Georgia and Moldova also in this broader region, or two other countries that, like Kyrgyzstan, has really have really taken the lead here when it comes to trying to establish a more pluralistic, competitive system. But at the same time, when parties and institutions are still at this very formative stage, it's clear that it becomes very difficult to govern these countries effectively. So it often risks that the system becomes paralyzed. So I would say that in this situation, when many institutions and ideas about nationhood or statehood, and it's all these things are still very much a work in progress. Yeah, I would say that it's unreasonable also to expect a kind of linear political development here. So sometimes, if we turn back to the title of this, it might be necessary to take step backwards or in order to move forward and improve on this democratic development later on, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a complex issue, obviously. Before we have some very, very interesting questions that your presentations raise. Before turning to them, I want to make two quick points. First, unfortunately, Mr. Azimov has had to leave. He's recently had some medical concerns, and these have pulled him away from our session. We hope all's well with him. Second, I just want to note that on May 12th, we will continue the series of CAMCA forums that are jointly sponsored by the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute and Silk Road Studies Program with the Rumsfeld Foundation, a session on young business leaders from Uzbekistan. These are the real people. These are people on the ground who are starting businesses, running businesses, and their observations are very important. May 19th, we will, as usual, the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute will be we offer an opening presentation of the IMF's regional outlook. This has been a long-term project with us and the IMF, and we look forward to that. Now, let me turn to all our panelists with this simple question. We're dealing with events that are dominated by a single figure, Sadiq Japarov. We've had various comments about him, but let me ask you your views, all of you, on him personally. Biography is important. Is there reason in his case for being optimistic about the future? Is this because of or in spite of his past? And as we consider the person of Sadiq Japarov, might bear in mind that Mr. Mirsuljan, president of Uzbekistan, served 14 years in a very different regime, if you will, under Mr. Karimov. So you can't just draw linear straight lines out from the past into the future. So what is your evaluation of his biography with respect to the prospects for his new regime? Mirsuljan, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I just connected. Talant? Okay. I think it's a very interesting background that Mr. Japarov has, and the fact that past years, over 5 years, he has not been active in politics. He was either imprisoned or in exile, and he was out of these politics. Of course, allowed him to come to the point and to the position where he is now. That's why the people trusted him. That a person who lost everything, if he is not going to change everything, then who will? And that belief of the people, I think, guided them to vote for Mr. Japarov. And those who came to referendum, although the voter turnout was quite low, but still, I think there is still enormous amount of people who trust him and who believe that he can do this, because we've got many different presidents. One was an academician, another was I don't know how to characterize Bakiev, who could probably lead a kolkhoz in his region or somewhere else, but not the country. We had Rosa Otunbayeva for a very short period of time. From all these presidents, I think she has my big respect. But regretfully, Atambayev and Jeenbekov, they continued leading our country in a wrong direction. And everything that we have today, including the leadership that we have today, is the result of what Almazbek Atambayev did during his reign, because he imprisoned him. He prosecuted him for being in opposition. That's why our people supported Mr. Japarov. Many things that Atambayev did and Sooronbay Jeenbekov did, and now Sadir Japarov will do, will of course show us where we are going, and they will show how different our current president is from them. I think there is one difference that he wants to move, he wants to do some things, he wants to be fast, and he's decisive. I think that's what he is different, what makes him different from other presidents that we had recently. So I really, I know that he's the president, so I should have hopes. And the thing that I find positive and promising is that he is decisive and he can do things. But he needs probably to change many people surrounding him. He needs to listen. Listen not only to, I don't know, some little criticism or big criticism in social media, but also to programs, to ideas that our country needs to implement and make them happen. Many ideas, when they are ideas, they are good, but if the implementation is bad, of course, they will not work. So he needs to change or bring other people who can do things. So if he can be this uniting person, I think we can be optimistic, because it's better to move than stagnate. It's better to, I don't know, to go if you think you are right. So that's why I have my optimism. So probably this is going to be my compliment or my short comment, which is inspiring and optimistic. But from the beginning, many things are going wrong. I think if, for him, if he conducted the parliamentary elections in December, he would get a lot of seats in the parliament. But he's conducting parliamentary elections a year later because of the constitutional referendum. This constitutional referendum that which is not changing anything for him. That was how things were done in Kyrgyzstan, although constitution forbade that. Presidents appointed chairmen of the parliament, of the judiciary, of everything here. They controlled them. So trying to make them officially written in the new constitution doesn't make things for him, doesn't make change for him. But he's losing time. Because of this referendum, he will get the new parliament only in autumn, in fall of 2021, which is a 1-year loss for everybody, for him especially, and for the people living in Kyrgyzstan. The whole year, we are fighting in elections all the time. We had this first, the presidential elections with the first step of the referendum, and then the local elections with the second step of the referendum. Now, starting from July and August, the whole country will be preparing for the elections for the parliament, which is going to happen probably in late September or early October. And every election turns people into towards different directions. The constitutional referendum made some foes and friends. The local elections. So I will remind, if you recall, why Atambayev's Rhine failed at the end, why he started immediately losing all his popularity among the people, why he lost his friends, because he decided to change the constitution in 2016. So this constitution, this referendum that we've got this month, also made some people far from his team. Many people lose their trust, lose their faith, because every time nothing else is changing but all these political issues that we are debating on and on and on. So regretfully, we are losing the whole year only for elections. And I would approve it. I would say, oh, it's okay, because we have the new constitution. I would say that if the new constitution was great, if the new constitution was really the new constitution, they would lead us forward. So these first steps of the current leadership in the country, I think, are working against them, because time works against them. People are hungry. People are they see how prices are going up. That's why they are angry with the initiative of raising electricity prices. Although I support it because we really need to make the prices right for the electricity to save this whole sector and to build new hydropower stations and other I don't know, alternative systems for energy. But in the eyes of the people, it's all bad. And another also unpopular issue among the public is this cross-border issues, the delimitation issues. So many of these small initiatives, they are being politicized, of course. They are dividing the people. So for the time of the election in October or in September 2021, he will lose some of his or many of his supporters. Did he need that? Maybe he really needed to conduct the parliamentary elections last year to be elected in January, and starting from January to focus on the key economic reforms, on the judiciary reforms that the country needed. And because of these elections, the country cannot go, I don't know, even for international relations, even for bringing investors who are not confident in the country. So I think he's losing time. But still, there is the window of opportunities. There is the window for reforms, and the two steps for him is probably to make his team of smart, somehow experienced, thinking differently people that can make change, and the second to focus on the urgent issues that we really need to overcome, to implement, so that tomorrow we've got another country, another more developed country. And the top priority now, I think, also the judicial independence, the independence of all these branches. Because if there is no trust in the country that there is the optimal division of power, there is the balance, then who is going to trust in our country? What investor will come to our country? So those are, I think, the matters, the issues that we need to discuss publicly, we need to solve. And then I think next time during our conversation, we'll be discussing real reforms that the country needed and that we have implemented.
So if I can summarize this, expect decisiveness, maybe, but without any clarity at this point as to what direction it might take. If that is a fair conclusion, let us ask Talant Sultanov what he thinks on this matter. Where is, does the new president have the potential, on the basis of background and experience, to do what you're hoping he might do?
Yes, I'd like to echo Mirsuljan here that because Mr. Japarov was absent from politics for over 5 years, it actually insulated him and saved his reputation, because all the active politicians during this period, they lost credibility in the population, especially when this power struggle happened between the ex-president and the next president. The real faces of the politicians became unveiled, and people saw how they quickly change allegiances. So I think this was one of the factors why Mr. Sadur Japarov was so popular, that he was the new figure outside of this kind of two warring camps. But also this factor is also a weakness for him, because he stayed out of politics for so long. He doesn't have a strong team of his own. So the establishment, which was kind of demoralized during the first days and weeks of October, regrouped, and again they encircled the key decision makers, and we see same familiar faces we saw in the past decade, and the policies are not actually kind of moving forward. It's just entrenched interest defending the status quo or reintroducing some of the policies that were kind of taken out in the past. So I think for Mr. Japarov to be very effective, he really needs a strong team, progressive minded team, instead of kind of the old guard, kind of insulating him from kind of being in direct contact with the society. And here I think he has one, I guess, positive trait, that he actually has a direct kind of approach with the people, and almost like a direct democracy, that he follows very closely in the social media the reaction of the people to the policies being introduced. And if he sees that policies are not being popular, then he's willing to backtrack. Just an example, during these days we are debating kind of reopening of casinos in the Kyrgyz Republic. They were kind of banned several years ago, and now the discussion is that we should reopen them and allow only foreigners, tourists, to to kind of play. But Mr. Japarov now says that, well, if we see that this policy is not going to be welcomed by the population, maybe we will cancel this initiative. On the point of elections, you know, the new thing in the parliamentary elections would be is that instead of the party lists, there would be a single mandate, single constituency kind of process. And so this means that the real popular figures in local areas can make it to the parliament. Because at the moment you have some constituencies, some villages or whole regions that have no representative in the parliament. They don't know who to turn to kind of with their issues. Whereas under the new rules, they would be able to directly elect their own representatives. And last point I think I wanted to make here on the checks and balances. You know, when we speak of Mr. Japarov, we should always also keep in mind Mr. Tashev, their closest friends, and I think he is kind of the kingmaker. But at the moment there is kind of, I think, a gentleman's agreement between these two leaders that we will be doing our own work and independently from each other. And we can see that I think it creates some sort of a de facto kind of checks and balance, but of course it's based on the personalities. It's not institutional, and it's not going to be sustainable in the long run.
Thank you very much, Talant Sultanov. As we turn to Johan Engvall, I want to focus this a little bit more, if I may, on two issues which, if you were to take 500 of the most recent articles worldwide on Kyrgyzstan, the two themes that come out most strongly, I would say, were first is the old and maybe misrepresented North-South issue. Is that relevant anymore? Is that changed? And second, a subject dear to your heart, corruption. How does Mr. Japarov look with respect to these two matters? If you could give us a concise view.
Yeah, sure. Let me just first say that I agree with when it comes to, let's say, reforms and corruption, anti-corruption. I would agree with Mirsuljan, especially what he said there about that there is certain decisiveness about Japarov if you compare to the previous presidents in a way. There's then exactly how he will use this and the people around him and how skillfully he will manage that is maybe another thing. But there's a little bit of maybe Saakashvili about him in this sense, that more, you know, executive in that sense. And also that he can, as Talant, I think, pointed out here, for the past 5 years, he was out of this a period really when the political elite in Kyrgyzstan made a lot to discredit themselves. Yeah. So at this point, he can step in. But I would also say one thing about the experience with him. I'm right now writing about 3 decades of the parliament in Kyrgyzstan. And during that time, I was looking at the parliamentary election in 2005, and when Akayev was out, and then when Akayev left to Moscow, there was a delegation of 5 or 6 Kyrgyz members of parliament who came to Moscow to negotiate his resignation. And actually, Japarov was one of those. So he is quite, he has been around for a while, and so we shouldn't forget about that in 2005. But I would say that when it comes to this, with some of these things, of course, with anti-corruption and things that like this economic amnesty that he has introduced, something that might have some similarities to what was done in Georgia, for instance. The problem, I would say, is that there's quite unclear circumstances about this. What is, who are allowed to pay back the state some things, and on what grounds, and how is this calculated, and things like that. But I would still say that it's a very difficult issue, of course, and I don't think that this punitive approach that was tend to be every time there's a upheaval, a new government or president steps in, and everyone starts talking about the fight against the corruption. That is absolutely central. But then after just a short while, it becomes difficult, and it's very selective in the sense that it's targeting a very punitive agenda here, where you arrest people and on these grounds. But I always used to think about when to understand the challenge here. I remember when I was interviewing a person who used to work quite high up in the Bakiyev administration, and I talked to him a few times, and then finally he told me that, well, Johan, you have to understand that corruption in Kyrgyzstan is like the Olympic Games. Most important is not to win, but to take part. So in this system, then you cannot arrest everyone. You really have to, I think, go about this in a more indirect approach, and really, I think this economic development and these type of issues, you cannot just have this zero tolerance, I think, and arrest everyone. It's not possible, especially. But I would say that for anti-corruption, if there is one aspect, of course, it's general aspect. It's the rule of law, of course, and then, but most of these aspects that are always emphasized is, of course, good things, but that's shown to be good prevention against corruption and help to stifle it. But the other question is, how do you get there? And so that's the main challenge. But then about this issue about North and South, I think that is quite an interesting aspect about Japarov, that he has actually managed to, he stands above these aspects in a way, wide support in that sense. And of course, this North-South issues always been a factor lying there that they can be manipulated and things like that by politicians, and which can be very dangerous, of course. But in Japarov's case, he is gathering, in that sense, following that this, transcending this cleavage, definitely, I would say.
Thank you very much. We've been focusing on very specific issues and on the person of Sadiq Japarov. We have a very interesting question to our panelists from a viewer, Ikatar Malik, who asks, could we call these challenges and systemic issues as teething problems that every post-colonial state has gone through or is going through? And he also asks, how do the regional developments and vibes affect what's going on in Kyrgyzstan? Two very interesting questions. I open the floor to all of you. Yes, Mirsuljan.
So of course, every post-colonial, especially post-Soviet countries, need to go through all these changes. And of course, I expected it even 10 years ago that Kyrgyzstan would be some kind of later consultants, advisors to all other Central Asian countries of how to change these democratic directions, because that will come. That will come to all these countries after some time. But for Kyrgyzstan, we started this process 30 years ago. We didn't have our first president a communist chief. We didn't have our first president to be the president even before. No, that was a totally different person outside of the system. That's why from the beginning, we declared democracy. We declared liberal democracy. We declared that we are going to become the second Switzerland of Central Asia. So this process is going really 30 years, 3 revolutions. I don't even remember, I don't even have the count of constitutional reforms that we've got. I think more than 10 maybe. We've got over 30 prime ministers. The only number that I enjoy is the number of presidents. The currently we have the 6th president, and I'm very happy about that. So we are changing. We are always in this process, in this disruptive process. Everything changes after some time, especially in the power, but nothing systematically, nothing institutionally. And we all know that institutions matter, but the problem is that we are still failing to build the institutions that we need. That's why, as Johan and Talant mentioned about focuses on personalities rather than the institutions in the country. So of course, we are going the road, we are stepping the road that all these post-colonial countries should and will and have had crossed. But I believe that the timeline should have been shorter. That the number of revolutions we made should have been lesser. And we needed to be different already, because we have been in this process, in this turbulent process all the time, all these 30 years. Regarding the vibes and change in the region, and maybe even some, I don't know, external influences that are happening. Kyrgyzstan, although in the beginning of my speech, I said that we are not democracy. Yes, we are not democracy, but we are the most democratic and the freest still country in this whole region. The closest democracy for us, I don't know who is that closest. Maybe
Mongolia.
Yeah, Mongolia is the closest. And on the other side, like, everybody's becoming authoritarian. Even Turkey now going the wrong way. So we are an island of that freedom in this region. And despite all the changes, all the vibes coming in the region against democracy, including from China or Russia or other Central Asian countries, we are going our own way. The only thing, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are doing it too long. We should to shorten it, and we should make our institutions work, because institutions matter, and only after that we'll have the real democracy.
Thank you, Talant. Sultanov, what are your thoughts on both these questions?
Well, I think indeed for the past 3 decades, Kyrgyzstan has been soul searching, and although I started in the beginning saying that we are going in circles, but I think one thing we've learned, that we've tested ourselves, we've tried different models, and in the process the society has become very resilient and maybe have developed a certain immunity towards difficult situations. So this permanent zone of discomfort has become our zone of comfort. I don't know if when we reach the stability and the prosperity, if the Kyrgyz society will feel, you know, content, or they will start designing some new things to do. But I think from the other hand, we cannot go on forever. The strength will wear out, and you know, we'll just die of starvation, literally, like, you know, figuratively speaking. So we need to do something. And I would like to start with what Mirsuljan alluded to. One reform that this government could do quickly, and it would bring very big dividends, benefits, is the judicial reform. At the moment, trust in the courts is very limited. They are so dependent on the presidential authority. But if this president can make the judges and courts truly independent, I think this would be a big leap forward. Another thing we should focus is on education. The education, unfortunately, is deteriorating. And that's why we are having this, you know, apathy in the elections. We have high-level people, you know, promoting poisonous substances as, you know, cures for COVID, and people believing this. So in order to avoid, you know, this downward spiral, we need to put a lot of effort into improving education. Third thing we should focus is, unfortunately, there have been a lot of attacks on the civil society, but actually it's the civil society that's, you know, helping high-level politicians when they are in difficult situations. Independent media with the independent, like, you know, investigative journalism, they're opening, you know, eyes of the people and the leaders in the real situation. In the Kyrgyz language, we have that saying where, like, you know, an enemy will talk to you that you laugh, but your friend will talk to you that you cry. So the president and the leadership, they actually need to support and trust journalists and the civil society. And finally, I think, especially during COVID years, there has been, as Johan was saying, that a lot of, you know, pressure on the private sector, people, you know, being thrown to prisons. But I think at the moment, we need to make it as much easy to operate for the private sector as possible. The focus must be on job creation. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really tough to deal with the current situation with COVID and all the crises.
Thank you very much. Turning to Johan Engvall for the last word, let's focus on just one of the two questions I posed, namely, or that our correspondent, Mr. Malik, proposed on the chat site. Is all this 30-year history, a natural evolution for a society moving from where Kyrgyz Republic was 40 years ago to the present? Is this, yes, very complicated, multiple presidents, revolutions, and so on, but is this process as a whole what we should expect? Is it exhibiting pathologies that are not to be welcomed?
Thank you. I would say like this, I think Talant there had a couple of very good points. I agree completely with this tremendous resilience era of Kyrgyz society to always, you know, find ways to go back to normal and things go on. Yeah, but at the same time, as you also mentioned, can this go on forever? This type of cyclical, you know, disruptions and there's a risk also, of course, that it reaches some kind of tipping point here. I mean, for every upheaval, every failure here, also, and as long as the state public goods doesn't improve, jobs are not there, the economic development or still, and all these problems remain. Yeah, there's also likelihood that what will happen the next revolution or the next upheaval after that, what are the, I remember I was always thinking, oh, but there's coming a new generation with new values, but there's also the question, what do this new generation represent and all that? You can still see, I think a positive factor is that it's still, with this new constitution, you should remember, it's still a secular state. You have heard these issues coming up more and more. The likelihood maybe of bringing the religious factor into politics is increasing. Yeah, and there are also, you can see in some surveys, yeah, Kyrgyzstan actually stands out in this region when it comes to certain areas of Kyrgyzstan, at least when it comes to support for Islamic law and things like that. Yeah, as a way out of these things. This is also a risk here in the future. And I would say also what appears a bit worrisome nowadays, I would say this time around is kind of disillusionment that appears to have taken hold more, I would say now. Society is disillusioned with the state. Many people, I remember I was always so impressed by this also in Kyrgyzstan, could talk to anyone almost, yeah. It's not like in Sweden, and they had some very interesting political views and really engaged in this issue. But you can see, I at least feel that much less, you know, people, they don't no longer to the same extent care about politics. They take a more cynical view, and they need to focus on the immediate needs of their families rather than thinking about the more broader picture, to say like that. And at the same time, I would also say that the opposition today and the politicians here, they have always, let's see what's happening now, but in the past, for instance, if it's going in a more authoritarian direction, then at least in the past, the opposition at least always managed to unite against that, yeah, on the Bakiyev times, for instance. But now it really seems to be quite a shadow of its former self here, the opposition. And I would, yeah.
We're running out of time.
Oh, okay. No, maybe that's what I'm a little bit worried about. This that you can see that many things become improving the structure, of course, of the different institutions and all that. But in the same way, I would say that if you look back, maybe in the 1990s, about the political elite, you could really still see. Of course, it was a challenging time. These people were educated in the Soviet system, but they were really the intellectual and political and economic elite. Yeah. While now I would say that the elite today that's something that worries me a little bit. It's a much more primitive nature of the elite, in the political elite, I would say here, because of this, you know, there's really no boundaries who can take place in deciding because of this, you know, focus on money and all that aspect. So I would say that is one thing that worries me a bit.
Well, we welcome anything you may write on this question of resilience in Kyrgyzstan. It's a key question. And let me perhaps summarize this last phase of our conversation in response to our friend Malik's question by citing what our colleague Mahmoud Tsereteli, a good Georgian American, has written. There's no way you can do this in a shorter period of time, he says. The parliamentary system frequently stays dysfunctional for decades. Post-war Italy is a good example. And I would say, though, that 30 years of turbulence, yes, that's true. Certainly the United States, which went through this process after a revolution very early, underwent 30 years of turbulence. And so this leads me to the conclusion that what we're talking about is not a goal, but a process. It's not a state of affairs. It is a process, and you either see evidence of the process working, and our speakers have given ample evidence of that, or of it's not working, and they've also given convincing evidence to that side. Maybe we should focus on specific areas, as Talant Sultanov recommended. He suggests education in the courts and education and the courts. That is a subject I think is much worthy of discussion. Are there other topics, key indicators that the government should focus on, or are these the only ones? Well, be that as it may, we've had a wonderful discussion this morning, and want to thank Azim Azimov, Talant Sultanov, Mirsuljan Namazaliev, and Johan, our colleague, and fellow Johan Engvall for their very, very insightful observations, and remind everyone that on May 12th, CAMCA Forum with the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute and the Silk Road Studies Program and the Rumsfeld Foundation will be reconvening to present young business leaders from Uzbekistan their insights on what's going on in their country. Then the following week, May 19th, we're going to hear from the International Monetary Fund its latest data on the economic evolution of Central Asian countries and countries of the Caucasus. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Did it.